The iPhone 14 has been the first iPhone that I can remember that I don't think you should actually bother upgrading to. It's almost like it's just the encore to the iPhone 13 instead of a whole new song. And now I've owned the iPhone 14 Pro Max for a couple of months now. There are 10 major issues that I've seen which make me actually really regret this purchase. First up is battery life. Now the iPhone 13 Pro Max already held the prize for the absolute battery king when it comes to smartphones. So you'd think that the battery life on the iPhone 14 Pro Max would surely surpass that of the 13. But in my experience, you'd be quite wrong. Firstly, it might be because of this, admittedly beautiful implementation of an always-on display, which does give you access to an ever-growing number of widgets without needing to, pick your phone up and unlock your phone each time. And by switching the always display off, you can indeed get some additional hours of battery life back from your phone. However, even if you did that, and in my experience of having one since launch day, I'm actually finding that I'm still burning through the battery faster than I'd like to think. And considering the iPhone 13 is a phone that should comfortably get you through a full 2 days without charging and without messing around with the settings that can reduce the power consumption, the iPhone 14 does feel like a downgrade in the battery department. Next up is one of the unexpected announcements from the iPhone 14 launch, and that was the Dynamic Island. And whilst it's been fun to hear other creators play around with the name,
that is until you turn on the phone, of course, because where the notch used to be, we now have Monkey Island.
That does excite me, and I can't wait to see what third-party developers continue to do with Monkey Island.
In bright daylight, when you look at the Fantasy Island, Monkey Island,
it has felt a little unfinished. Now I do love that we're actually finally getting to see other apps make use of the Dynamic Island feature. For example, I went to park my car the other day, and to have a countdown timer permanently at the top of my display was actually really useful to see. But for the rest of the time, it's kind of a bit annoying. When watching videos, for example, the pill type cutout just intrudes into the content more so than the previous generation notch did. And if anything, I wish they'd not joined the two sensors together with a black bar and instead actually having two separate kind of hole punches for them. Ultimately, I just feel that the Dynamic Island could, instead of being made the dynamic notch, and then we could reclaim those fractions of valuable millimeters which are now essentially being wasted by moving the notch down, instead now leaving some even more wasted, useless space above it. Now, of course, one of the biggest problems on the iPhone 14 range is currently reserved exclusively for those who live in the US, and that is Apple's decision to remove the SIM tray from the phone. There are some good reasons behind their decision though. By doing this, and the chance of SIM fraud, which is where someone illegally puts your phone number onto their SIM card so they can falsely take your identity, becomes a moot point. Now, for most people, not having a SIM card tray isn't really a problem. Now, if you carry around one phone and you typically keep that one phone for, a year plus, then it's kind of fine. It just means that when you upgrade your phone each time, you're likely gonna have to put up with maybe a small amount of time where you can't use your phone or, can't make or receive phone calls because the SIM card needs to be pushed by the carrier to your phone. And this is even more prevalent if you are trying to do this on, say, the launch date of a new iPhone, because the carriers will be so congested with, trying to do this across thousands and probably millions of iPhones all at the same time. And as we saw with the iPhone 14, it just becomes a bit of a mess, with some people waiting days to get their new SIM activated. That's days of no phone, no messaging, no internet, pretty much gives you a useless phone. And this, of course, is something that's only going to get worse as they roll out the same kind of, similar design to other countries with future iPhone versions. And this issue still continues through to the fact we still don't have USB-C on any iPhones. For decisions only known to Apple, I still need to carry around a Lightning cable when it is the only device I own, bar from the AirPods Pro Maxes, that still uses Lightning. And in 2022, that's pretty bad. Now, the good news is that Apple is being forced to change to USB-C on any phones produced from autumn of 2024. So the iPhone 15 might include one. And I say might because, as we've seen over the years, Apple has a habit of doing their own thing when it comes to things like this. And from the beginning, it is very apparent they're removing ports instead of changing them. From the MacBook Airs now, which exclusively have USB-C on them, to losing the headphone jack, and now the SIM tray. It wouldn't surprise me if the iPhone 15 came with no charging port at all, and instead relied solely on wireless charging instead. If that's the case, then I really hope Apple has a plan to improve the wireless charging speeds, because at just 15 watts, it's basically half as fast as when charging with an actual cable. Problem Number 5, I think we're on now, as something that surprised me this year, and that's been the number of sheer bugs and glitches with iOS 16 that I don't think we've ever really seen before. Now, maybe this is a side effect of working through COVID, but problems like the copy and paste bug, where it would constantly prompt me if I wanted to paste, was still present in the full release of iOS 16. And I personally didn't experience many of the other bugs, the camera glitches or iMessage issues where people couldn't send messages, but it has been the first year where I've seen, significantly more issues and complaints than before. Now, that's not something you unique to the iPhone, of course, the Pixel 6 Pro had probably the most bug-ridden experience on launch that I've experienced so far, where even their own apps would crash like repeatedly, taking them months to solve it. But for a company who prides itself on quality, like particularly around its app store or like approval process, it is unusual to see so many issues get through to launch. Another issue that's been, well, an issue for far too long to remember is Siri. I honestly don't really ever think of using Siri other than to set a timer or switch a light on or off, or maybe ask about the weather, because it just seems that any time I try to use it for, more than that and using longer sentences, it just completely misses the mark. I recently shot a video about using only the Apple Watch Ultra for a full day, where I took a run in Hyde Park in London, and I should have been able to use Siri to dictate a message to a friend of mine who I was meeting up with. But after literally 5 attempts, I just gave up, with Siri apparently just making up what it heard me say. Now, when you compare this to the likes of particularly Google's own Google Assistant, which I've genuinely been blown away with by now recently on the Pixels, it's really surprising why Apple hasn't been able to improve the Siri to the same level. So if you want to be able to send messages on the go when running or maybe even driving a car, Siri might not be the best thing. Now, the best way to work around that I've come across so far is to use Siri to send a voice message instead. So at least the recipient will hear exactly what you've said instead of like Siri's bad interpretation. Okay, so for number 7 now. Now, this is something I've only really seen quite recently and has only come up where I've constantly been switching phones, and that is how bad the Wi-Fi is in these iPhones. I use this home automation system around my house, and when I arrive home and get out of my car and walk up to the front door, I sometimes have to sit there waiting minutes, usually with me kind of swiping and closing and reopening the apps, trying to get them to reconnect to the Wi-Fi before I can let myself in my own front door. Now, yes, of course, I could open it with a key fob, but I don't carry around like any keys on me. There's no car keys, no house keys. Now, compared to pretty much every other Android phone that I've tested, I noticed that this isn't a problem on Android. Before I've even got my phone out of my pocket, the phone has connected itself to my home Wi-Fi, and so I'm not left just waiting outside in the rain, looking a bit like a lemon. So the Wi-Fi is faster to connect on Android, and arguably even faster in terms of connection speeds. So the Wi-Fi is faster to connect on Android than it is on an iPhone. Next up for number 8 now is, whilst the prices have stayed the same in the US and actually also in China, prices have gone up for the iPhone 14 everywhere else in the world. Now, my iPhone 14 Pro Max, for example, is now £150 more expensive than the similar iPhone 13 Pro Max at launch. And whilst it is, of course, fairly safe to assume that this is down to like the never-ending inflation that we're all experiencing this year, increased supply cost and fluctuation in currency, it does feel a bit unfair considering they have kept the same price for the US and China exclusively. But Apple giveth and Apple taketh away, with the US keeping the cheaper price but then losing out on things like a SIM card tray. Maybe that's where the savings is coming from. What this does mean though is that the iPhone 13 has come down in price, and with the iPhone 13 mini actually being a solid purchase right now, with flagship features and a small form factor. And if you want to know more about my thoughts around the iPhone 13 a year on, please do go find the link to subscribe to the channel down below this video. The next problem for me though has been the disappointing upgrades to the camera system. Now, don't get me wrong, the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro still hold its own in terms of having one of the best camera systems available in a smartphone, with one of the smoothest transitions when switching lenses of any phone that I've used before. But this year, many of us were hoping for perhaps a 5 times or a 10 times optical zoom to compete with the likes of the Google Pixel and the Samsung S22 Ultra. Instead though, we're graced with a 2 times mode, which is just a cropped version of the main sensor. And whilst this does give you great photos, I think we all would have preferred 5 times or maybe a 10 times zoom over this kind of 2x mode, which you could just get by standing a foot or two closer, to whatever you're shooting an image of, just done. Now, I'd like to think that this might come in next year's iPhone 15, but I really have my doubts that this is even on Apple's radar for like product developments. And instead, I'm sure they'll try to achieve this with like some more complex AI computing methods instead, when we all know they should just put the 5 or 10x optical zoom in the phones. And for problem 10, now this is more of a general commentary piece around Apple and the iPhone as a whole, but for me, iPhones and specifically the iPhone 14 is starting to feel just a bit stale. Things have significantly slowed down in product development, and the innovation that used to be a key focus for Apple just feels to be lacking. When Steve Jobs died back in October 2011, wow, that long ago, he left 4 years of projects for Apple to complete. Now, fast forward to 2022, and we've seen all of those already come to fruition. So where does it go from here? Apple still has a lot going for it though. It's leading the class when it comes to in-car entertainment, Face ID is still unbeaten, secure and convenient, and the cameras are just SMPOST leading the pack still. But with things like iPadOS still a hot mess in my opinion, and their refusal to support things like RCS for cross-platform messages, it's only reaffirming why I've started looking at Android as a really interesting alternative. And perhaps Apple's Think Different slogan, which was actually a direct response to IBM's slogan of Think, perhaps I feel they're now in this dangerous precipice of becoming the very thing that they set out to destroy. Now, I hope I'm wrong there, but for now, if you are looking at buying a brand new iPhone, don't get an iPhone 14. Watch this video instead to see what I recommend, and I'll see you there.